The strongest men don't always fall in battle. Sometimes they disappear behind a closed door, waiting for someone brave enough to knock. I never believed that until the morning my 6-year-old son changed the life of the most feared man in New York. My name is Emily Carter, and 18 months ago, I accepted a housekeeping job that every other maid in Manhattan had refused. The pay was almost double what luxury hotels offered, which should have been my first warning. Nothing came that easy. But overdue rent didn't care about instincts, and Noah deserved more than the tiny one-bedroom apartment where the radiator groaned louder than my alarm clock every winter morning. The address led us beyond towering iron gates into an estate so large it looked less like a home and more like a private museum hidden behind centuries-old oak trees. Black SUVs rested quietly along the circular driveway while men in tailored suits stood motionless beside marble columns. None of them smiled as I parked my 12-year-old Honda Civic near the employee entrance. One guard checked my identification twice before nodding toward the front door. Another looked down at Noah holding my hand with his small blue backpack hanging from one shoulder. "Employees don't usually bring children," he said. "His school is closed today," I answered softly. "He'll stay out of everyone's way." The man hesitated before opening the door without another word. The mansion was strangely quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet in the way hospitals became quiet after visiting hours ended. Expensive paintings covered endless walls, yet every hallway felt empty, as though laughter had abandoned the place years ago. The house manager, Mrs. Whitmore, greeted me with tired eyes that suggested sleep had become a luxury. "You'll clean the east wing," she said. "Avoid the third floor unless you're instructed otherwise." Her voice lowered almost to a whisper. "Especially the last room." I nodded without asking questions. People who desperately needed jobs learn not to ask many questions. As the morning passed, I dusted bookshelves taller than my apartment building's living room ceiling, polished crystal vases worth more than my car, and watched servants move carefully through the mansion as though every footstep might disturb someone important. Nobody laughed. Nobody talked unless necessary. Even the cooks in the enormous kitchen spoke in hushed voices. During lunch, I finally asked another maid why everyone seemed frightened. She looked over both shoulders before answering. "Mr. Adrian Moretti has been sick for weeks." The name meant nothing to me then. "Doctors come every day," she continued quietly. "Specialists. Private nurses. None of them stay long." "Why?" I asked. She simply shook her head. "Because Hope doesn't live on the third floor anymore." Before I could ask another question, I realized Noah wasn't beside me. Panic tightened my chest. His half-eaten peanut butter sandwich still rested on the kitchen table. "Noah," I called, hurrying into the hallway. No answer. My heartbeat quickened as I searched room after room until I noticed the elevator doors slowly closing. A tiny blue sneaker disappeared inside just before they shut completely. The illuminated number above the elevator climbed upward. First floor, second floor, then third. My breath caught. The forbidden floor. I sprinted toward the staircase, fear pounding louder than my footsteps against polished marble. Somewhere above me, hidden behind one silent door, my little boy had wandered into the only room everyone in that enormous mansion was too afraid to enter. The staircase seemed twice as long on the way up. Every step echoed through the mansion, while one terrifying thought repeated inside my head. Please let him be safe. Please let him still be smiling. By the time I reached the third floor, my lungs burned and my hands trembled. The hallway stretched before me beneath soft golden lights, lined with dark wooden doors that all looked identical except for the final one. It stood slightly open. Every instinct told me to run inside. Before I could move, 2 security men stepped into the hallway. Neither raised a hand to stop me, but both watched with expressions I could not read. One quietly said, "He is in there." There was no anger in his voice, only surprise. I pushed the heavy door open, expecting chaos. Instead, I found silence. The room was enormous, though most of the curtains remained drawn against the afternoon sun. Medical equipment rested quietly beside an elegant bed. Bottles of medicine filled a nearby table. The scent of cedar wood mixed with herbal tea and disinfectant. A man lay beneath a gray blanket, his face pale against the white pillow. Even sick, Adrian Moretti carried the kind of presence that made the room feel smaller around him. His dark hair had fallen across his forehead, and light stubble shadowed a strong jaw that looked as though it had forgotten how to smile. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow but uneven. Yet none of that was what stopped me. Noah sat cross-legged on the carpet beside the bed, completely relaxed. His backpack lay open beside him. Colored pencils covered the floor. He was carefully folding a piece of blue construction paper into what looked like a little bird. "Mom," he whispered with a bright smile. "Please be quiet. He is sleeping." I hurried toward him, my heart still racing. "Noah, we have to go? Right now." He looked up at me with innocent confusion. But he has not smiled all day. My eyes shifted toward the bed. Adrian had not moved. Before I could apologize and leave, a deep voice, rough from illness, filled the room. "Let the boy stay." I froze. Slowly, Adrian opened his eyes. They were lighter than I expected, a calm steel blue that studied everything without wasting movement. I had never seen eyes look so tired while remaining so alert. He did not look at me first. He looked at Noah, who proudly held up the paper bird. "This one flies better than the last one," Noah announced. Adrian stared at the tiny paper creation for several seconds before reaching out with visible effort. His fingers accepted it carefully, as though it were something valuable instead of folded paper from a discount craft store. The corner of his mouth lifted almost imperceptibly. It was barely a smile, but everyone in the room noticed. One of the nurses standing quietly near the wall inhaled sharply. Another lowered her eyes in disbelief. Mrs. Whitmore had appeared behind me without making a sound. Her face had gone completely still. "That is the first time," she whispered so softly I almost missed it, "in nearly 3 weeks." Noah climbed onto the chair beside the bed without waiting for permission. "You need more birds," he declared confidently. "Birds make people feel less lonely." Adrian continued watching him. "Do they?" he asked. Noah nodded with absolute certainty. "They do if somebody makes them just for you." The powerful man who frightened an entire city looked down at the little paper bird resting in his hand, as though it carried an answer every expensive doctor had failed to find. And for reasons I could not explain, the cold emptiness inside that mansion suddenly felt just a little less impossible to survive. The next morning, I expected everything to return to the way it had been. I expected someone to tell me that Noah was no longer welcome upstairs, that what happened the day before had been a lucky coincidence that would never happen again. Instead, Mrs. Whitmore met me at the employee entrance holding a small silver access card. She placed it in my hand, without saying a word at first. Then she looked directly into my eyes. "Mr. Moretti has made one request," she said quietly. "If your son wishes to visit, no one is to stop him." I blinked in disbelief. Surely there must be some mistake. She slowly shook her head. "There has not been a mistake in this house for a very long time. Yesterday was something else entirely." The mansion still felt quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. The heavy tension hanging in every hallway had softened ever so slightly. Staff members still worked carefully, yet I caught several exchanging curious glances whenever Noah skipped past carrying a small paper bag filled with crayons, construction paper, and the peanut butter crackers he insisted everyone liked. By late morning, I finished polishing the grand staircase and walked upstairs with Noah beside me. This time nobody tried to stop us. One of the security men even opened the bedroom door before we reached it. Adrian sat upright against several pillows, a blanket covering his legs. His color had improved just enough that he no longer looked like a man fading into the shadows. A doctor stood nearby reviewing medical charts, while 2 nurses quietly adjusted medication schedules. The conversation stopped the instant Noah walked in. Adrian looked toward the doorway. The serious expression he wore all morning softened almost immediately. "You came back," he said. Noah smiled as though that had always been the plan. "I told you I would make more birds." He emptied the paper bag across a small table, covering it with bright sheets of colored paper. "Today we are making a whole flock." Adrian studied the colorful mess with genuine curiosity. "A whole flock. One bird gets lonely," Noah explained matter-of-factly. "Birds need families." Nobody spoke after that. Even the doctor remained unusually quiet while Noah patiently folded another bird, then another, explaining every step as though teaching a lifelong friend. Adrian followed each movement carefully. His large hands struggled with the delicate folds, and his first attempt collapsed into an uneven shape. Noah giggled without any hint of judgment. "That one just needs another chance." Adrian surprised everyone by laughing under his breath. It was not loud. It lasted only a second. Yet the sound filled the enormous room more completely than the expensive piano downstairs ever had. The nurses exchanged astonished looks. The doctor lowered his clipboard. I realized every person in that room had been watching for signs of physical recovery, but none of them expected healing to begin with laughter. As Noah arranged the finished paper birds across the windowsill, sunlight slipped through a narrow opening in the curtains, casting soft shadows that danced across the walls. Adrian watched the little figures sway in the breeze from the air vent. "They look like they are flying," he murmured. Noah nodded proudly. "Now they can keep you company when everybody else is busy." Adrian remained silent for several moments before looking toward me for the first time that morning. His tired blue eyes carried gratitude that words could not quite express. "Mrs. Carter," he said quietly, "your son has given this house something it has been missing for longer than I care to admit." Before I could answer, a sharp knock interrupted the peaceful moment. One of the security men stepped inside, his usually calm expression replaced by quiet concern. He leaned toward Adrian and spoke only a few words. I could not hear the message, but I watched every trace of warmth disappear from Adrian's face as he slowly looked toward the paper birds resting in the sunlight, as though he already knew someone outside that room wanted to destroy the fragile peace they had just begun to build. The room changed the moment the guard finished whispering into Adrian's ear. The warmth that Noah had somehow pulled into that quiet space seemed to retreat behind Adrian's thoughtful expression. He thanked the guard with a slight nod before dismissing him. The door closed again, and for several long seconds nobody spoke. Noah continued arranging his paper birds across the windowsill, completely unaware that the adults around him were measuring the silence. Adrian finally leaned back against the pillows and closed his eyes for a moment. His breathing sounded heavier than before. The doctor stepped forward with a glass of water and another dose of medicine. "It is time," he said gently. Adrian barely looked at the pills. "Later." The doctor hesitated. "You have already delayed twice this morning." Adrian slowly shook his head. "Later." I noticed the frustration on every face in the room. One nurse quietly lowered her eyes. Another adjusted the blanket, even though it did not need adjusting. It was obvious this conversation had happened many times before. Noah looked from the medicine to Adrian with innocent curiosity. "Does it taste bad?" Adrian opened one eye and almost smiled. "It does." Noah considered that answer seriously before reaching into his backpack. After searching for several seconds, he pulled out a small package of fruit-flavored gummy snacks that I had packed with his lunch. He held them out with both hands. "When I do not like medicine, my mom lets me eat one of these after. It helps." I immediately started to apologize. "Noah, that is not." Adrian gently raised one hand, stopping me before I could finish. He looked at the tiny package as though it were the most unusual offer he had ever received. "You are willing to share your favorite snack?" Noah nodded without hesitation. "You look like you need it more than I do." Something shifted behind Adrian's tired blue eyes. Not surprise. Something deeper. Something that had been locked away for years. Without another word, he reached for the glass of water, picked up the medicine everyone else had spent weeks trying to convince him to take, and swallowed it calmly. The room fell completely still. Even the machines beside the bed seemed louder in the silence. The doctor stared in disbelief before quietly clearing his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Moretti." Adrian ignored him. Instead, he accepted the gummy snack from Noah, carefully opened the package, and ate exactly one piece. "You were right," he said after a moment. "It helped." Noah grinned so proudly that I felt my own eyes begin to sting. I had spent years teaching my son that kindness cost nothing. Watching it reach someone who possessed more wealth than I could imagine somehow made that lesson feel even more valuable. After lunch, Noah grew sleepy and curled up on a reading chair near the window with a children's book resting across his lap. Within minutes, he had drifted into a peaceful nap beneath the afternoon sunlight. Adrian watched him quietly for a long time before speaking again, his voice barely above a whisper. "He reminds me of someone." I turned toward him. His eyes remained fixed on Noah. "My younger brother, Daniel," he said softly. He believed every broken thing deserved another chance. Even people. The words seemed almost too heavy for the quiet room. He folded paper airplanes every Sunday afternoon. He covered our entire house with them. Adrian reached toward one of Noah's blue paper birds resting beside the bed. His fingers brushed the folded wings with remarkable care. I had forgotten what hope looked like until yesterday. Before I could respond, the bedroom door opened once more. Mrs. Whitmore entered carrying a sealed envelope that had no return address. Her composed expression faltered for the first time since I had met her. She looked directly at Adrian before quietly saying, "Sir, this was left at the front gate. This morning, whoever delivered it knew exactly when the house would be distracted." Mrs. Whitmore placed the sealed envelope on the bedside table with unusual care, as though even touching it felt dangerous. Adrian studied the plain white paper without reaching for it. There was no name written on the front, no stamp, no handwriting. Just an unmarked envelope resting beside a row of medicine bottles and a blue paper bird. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One represented fear. The other represented hope. After several quiet seconds, Adrian broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. His eyes moved across the page only once before he carefully folded it again. His expression remained calm, but something in the room shifted. The doctor quietly gathered his clipboard. The nurses exchanged uneasy glances before excusing themselves without a word. Even Mrs. Whitmore seemed to understand that whatever had been written there belonged to a world far removed from ordinary life. I lowered my voice. "Is everything all right?" Adrian looked toward the window where Noah still slept peacefully, his cheek resting against the arm of the reading chair. A faint smile appeared before disappearing just as quickly. "Someone believes I am too weak to notice what is happening around me," he replied. "That is often the mistake people make when they only see illness." I did not ask another question. It was not my place. Instead, I quietly gathered Noah's crayons scattered across the table. As I reached for the last one, Adrian spoke again. "Mrs. Carter." I looked up. "Thank you." The words were simple, yet completely sincere. "For what?" He glanced toward Noah once more. "For bringing light into a house that had forgotten how to open its windows." I felt my throat tighten. No one had ever thanked me for simply raising my son to be kind. Before I could answer, Mrs. Whitmore returned carrying a small folder. "Sir, there is something else you should know." She handed it to Adrian. He opened it slowly, revealing several financial documents. His eyes narrowed slightly before he passed the folder to me without explanation. I hesitated. "I should not." "Please." I looked down at the papers. At first they made no sense. Then I recognized an address. My apartment building. Another page listed the balance of my overdue rent. The next showed Noah's elementary school tuition. Every outstanding payment had been marked in full with today's date. I stared at the documents, unable to understand what I was seeing. "Who paid these?" Adrian answered quietly. "The accounts were settled this morning." I looked back at him in complete disbelief. "Why would you do that?" He remained silent for a moment before speaking. "Because your son gave me something no amount of money could purchase." I immediately shook my head. "I cannot accept this." "You already have," he replied gently. "Nothing has been given that carries any obligation. Your life remains your own. Noah's future should never depend upon whether his mother can afford another double shift." My eyes filled before I could stop them. Nobody outside my tiny circle had ever noticed how carefully I counted every dollar or how often I skipped buying things for myself, so Noah never had to go without. Somehow Adrian had noticed everything without asking a single question. Noah stirred in his chair and slowly opened his eyes. He stretched, rubbed his face, then smiled the instant he saw Adrian awake. "Did you keep the bird safe?" he asked sleepily. Adrian reached toward the bedside table where the blue paper bird still rested exactly where Noah had left it. "I intend to keep it for a very long time." Noah climbed down and walked over with another folded creation hidden behind his back. "Then this one needs a friend too." Adrian accepted the second bird with quiet gratitude. As he placed it beside the first, I noticed something I had never seen before. The medicine bottles that had once been ignored now stood half empty, the water glass beside them completely finished, and for the first time since entering that mansion, I realized the greatest change had not happened inside Adrian's body. It had happened inside his heart. The following week settled into a rhythm that nobody inside the mansion could have imagined only days earlier. Every morning, Noah walked through the front doors carrying a different craft project tucked carefully inside his little backpack. Some days it was another paper bird. Other days it was a drawing of trees, clouds, or smiling stick figures holding hands beneath an oversized sun. Every afternoon, Adrian waited without admitting that he was waiting. I noticed it before anyone else. He finished his medicine on time. He asked the doctor questions instead of dismissing him. He even requested that the curtains remain open so the sunlight could reach the windowsill where Noah had arranged his growing flock of paper birds. The room no longer felt like a place where people quietly gave up. It felt like somewhere healing had finally found permission to enter. One rainy afternoon, while Noah sat on the carpet building a tiny cardboard house from an empty tissue box, I stepped into the hallway to return a basket of freshly folded towels. As I passed the library, I heard two familiar voices speaking behind a partially closed door. I had no intention of listening, but my own name stopped me. "Everything has been paid," Mrs. Whitmore said softly. "Her apartment lease has been extended for another year under a charitable housing trust. She still believes the landlord found another sponsor." My footsteps froze. Another voice answered. It was Adrian's, calmer and stronger than it had been since I first met him. "Good. And Noah's school. His tuition has been prepaid through middle school. The scholarship paperwork was completed yesterday exactly as you instructed. Neither of them knows it came from you." Silence lingered before Mrs. Whitmore spoke again. "You could simply tell her." Adrian answered almost immediately. "No. Kindness loses something the moment it expects gratitude in return." I quietly backed away before either of them noticed I had been standing there. My heart felt strangely heavy. Every difficult choice I had worried about during the past year had somehow become easier, and the person responsible had never once asked for recognition. When I returned to Adrian's room, Noah had convinced him to help decorate the cardboard house with colored stickers. Adrian held one tiny star between his fingers with the concentration of someone handling priceless artwork. "It goes on the roof," Noah instructed confidently, "because every home needs hope above it." Adrian smiled and carefully pressed the sticker into place. Watching them together, it became harder to remember that only days earlier they had been complete strangers. The doctor entered carrying updated test results. Unlike previous visits, there was unmistakable relief on his face. "Your fever continues to improve," he said. "Your strength is returning faster than we expected." Adrian accepted the news with a grateful nod. Perhaps I finally had the right medicine. The doctor smiled politely, assuming he meant the new treatment plan. I knew differently. So did Adrian. His eyes drifted toward Noah, who was humming quietly while arranging paper furniture inside the tiny cardboard house. Just then, one of the security men appeared at the doorway. His expression remained respectful, but something about his posture immediately caught Adrian's attention. "Sir," he said carefully, "the board members have arrived unexpectedly. They insist on seeing you today." The warmth in Adrian's face faded, replaced by the calm focus of a man preparing to step back into a world that had not changed simply because his heart had begun to heal. He looked once at Noah, then slowly folded the little paper roof into place as though trying to protect something far more fragile than cardboard before quietly saying, "Tell them they may come in. It is time we discovered who has mistaken compassion for weakness." The board members arrived exactly 10 minutes later. 5 men in tailored suits walked into the mansion with polished shoes, measured smiles, and the confidence of people who believed the future already belonged to them. From the hallway, I could hear their calm voices carrying through the open doors of the downstairs conference room. Mrs. Whitmore gently suggested that Noah and I remain upstairs, but curiosity lingered in every corner of the house. Even the staff moved more quietly than usual, listening without appearing to listen. Adrian stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows wearing a charcoal suit for the first time since I had met him. The illness had taken weight from his face, yet it had not diminished the quiet authority that surrounded him. He looked stronger than the man who had first accepted a folded paper bird with trembling hands. Before leaving his room, he stopped beside Noah, who was carefully adding tiny paper trees around the cardboard house they had built together. "Will you keep building while I am gone?" Adrian asked. Noah smiled. "Only if you promise to come back." Adrian nodded without hesitation. "That is a promise." Nearly an hour passed before I carried a tray of fresh coffee toward the conference room. The door stood slightly open. I had no intention of interrupting, but Mrs. Whitmore quietly motioned for me to enter. The room fell silent as I placed each cup on the polished oak table. One of the visitors barely acknowledged me. Another looked at Adrian with a smile that never reached his eyes. "You have been away from business longer than expected," the oldest man remarked politely. "Many people have begun wondering whether it is time for new leadership." Adrian calmly stirred his coffee without rushing to answer. People often mistake silence for absence. The man leaned back comfortably. Recovery changes priorities. Perhaps retirement would bring you peace. Adrian looked toward the rain falling beyond the windows before speaking. Peace is not something another person grants. It is something a person chooses. Nobody responded immediately. The confidence that had filled the room earlier seemed noticeably smaller. As I quietly turned to leave, another board member noticed a folded blue paper bird resting beside Adrian's notebook. He raised an eyebrow with obvious amusement. That seems unusual. Adrian picked up the little bird with remarkable care. Does it? It does not match the image people expect from you. Adrian smiled faintly. Perhaps that is because they have been looking at the wrong image. I left before hearing another word, but I understood something important. The strongest person in that room was not the one speaking the loudest. Later that afternoon, Adrian returned upstairs exactly as promised. Noah immediately ran toward him carrying the finished cardboard house. Look, he said proudly. Now everybody has a place to come home to. Adrian knelt carefully despite the doctor's protests earlier that morning. He examined every tiny detail, from the paper flowers to the uneven little fence Noah had drawn with blue marker. This is beautiful, he said sincerely. Noah pointed toward the front door of the miniature house. It still needs one thing. Adrian looked curious. What is missing? Noah reached into his backpack and pulled out 3 tiny paper figures he had cut out that morning. One was tall, one was medium-sized, one was very small. He placed them together in front of the little house. Nobody should live alone, he said simply. The room became perfectly still. Adrian looked at the tiny family standing together beneath the paper roof, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw tears gathering quietly in his eyes. He blinked them away before anyone else could notice, but I had already seen enough to understand that the walls surrounding his heart were no longer protecting him. They were finally beginning to fall, and somewhere beyond the peaceful walls of that mansion, someone else had just learned that Adrian Moretti was standing again. That evening the rain finally stopped, leaving the gardens outside the mansion washed clean beneath a sky glowing with the last colors of sunset. For the first time since arriving there, I opened one of the tall windows in Adrian's room. Fresh autumn air drifted inside, carrying the scent of damp grass and cedar trees. Noah stood beside the windowsill, carefully straightening every paper bird until they all faced the fading sunlight. Adrian watched him in thoughtful silence before quietly saying, "You always make certain no one is left behind." Noah shrugged as though the answer were obvious. Because being alone feels sad. Adrian lowered his eyes. Yes, it does. The room remained still for several moments before he reached toward the nightstand and opened the small wooden drawer I had never seen him touch. From inside, he removed a faded photograph protected by an old leather frame. He held it carefully before offering it to me. "I think you deserve to know why your son changed everything." I accepted the photograph with both hands. It showed 2 boys standing beside a lake, both laughing beneath the summer sun. One was unmistakably Adrian as a teenager. The younger boy beside him wore the same bright smile I had come to know on Noah's face. "That is Daniel," Adrian said quietly. "My little brother." His voice remained calm, but every word carried years of unspoken sorrow. He believed every person deserved kindness before judgment. He collected injured birds. He planted trees. He made paper airplanes every Sunday because he said dreams needed wings. Adrian looked toward Noah, who was now building a tiny paper bridge between 2 cardboard hills. He never stopped believing people could become better. I waited without interrupting. One winter he became seriously ill. Adrian continued softly. Our family had every resource money could buy. The best doctors. The finest hospitals. None of it changed what happened. He paused before taking a slow breath. After I lost him, I convinced myself that hope only made loss hurt more. So I buried every part of myself that reminded me of him. His eyes rested on the growing flock of paper birds lining the window. Then your son walked into this room, carrying folded paper instead of fear. I felt tears warming my eyes. Suddenly, every quiet smile, every moment Adrian had watched Noah with silent gratitude, every carefully protected paper bird made perfect sense. Noah looked up from his project. "Who is Daniel?" Adrian smiled gently. "Someone I loved very much." Noah thought for a moment before picking up the brightest yellow paper bird he had made all week. He walked over and carefully placed it into Adrian's hands. Then this one is for him. Adrian stared at the little bird for several long seconds before carefully placing it beside the photograph instead of with the others. Thank you, he whispered. I think you would have liked that. As darkness settled outside, Mrs. Whitmore quietly entered carrying evening tea. She stopped in surprise when she noticed the photograph resting openly beside the paper birds. Sir, she said softly, I have not seen that picture in over 15 years. Adrian nodded. Neither had I. She smiled with tears shining in her eyes before quietly leaving the room again. Later that night, after Noah had fallen asleep on the reading chair beneath his favorite blanket, Adrian stood beside the window for the first time without assistance. His strength had returned enough for him to look out across the peaceful grounds below. Emily, he said without turning around. I spent years believing power meant protecting everything I owned. He glanced toward the sleeping child with unmistakable warmth. Now I understand that real strength begins the moment you finally have someone worth coming home to. At that exact moment, headlights slowly appeared beyond the front gates, and several unfamiliar luxury sedans rolled silently into the long driveway, their arrival announcing that whatever peace had begun inside the mansion was about to face its greatest test yet. The unfamiliar cars rolled to a quiet stop beneath the mansion's front entrance, just as the last light disappeared beyond the trees. I stood beside the upstairs window, watching several distinguished men and women step onto the stone walkway, carrying no expressions of celebration or hostility, only quiet determination. Mrs. Whitmore appeared moments later, her footsteps calm despite the late hour. They requested a private meeting, she said. Adrian gave a small nod, then let them in. Before leaving the room, he glanced toward Noah, still sleeping peacefully beneath the blanket with one small hand resting beside the cardboard house they had built together. Adrian smiled almost to himself. Do not wake him. Every child deserves dreams uninterrupted. Downstairs, the guests gathered inside the grand library rather than the formal conference room. The atmosphere felt different this time. There were no subtle challenges, no carefully disguised ambitions. Instead, one silver-haired gentleman stepped forward holding a leather folder. We came because we have watched something remarkable happen in this house, he said respectfully. We expected to find a man preparing to surrender his responsibilities. Instead, we found someone who remembered why they mattered. Adrian remained silent, allowing the man to continue. Leadership built on fear can survive for a while. Leadership built on character lasts much longer. One by one, the others placed signed documents onto the large oak table. Mrs. Whitmore quietly leaned toward me and whispered, They have unanimously renewed their confidence in him. I looked across the room at Adrian. He accepted none of the praise for himself. Instead, he simply thanked each person with quiet humility. There was no celebration, no triumphant speech, only a man who had rediscovered the part of himself that illness had not taken away after all. The following spring, life looked completely different. I no longer worked endless double shifts trying to outrun overdue bills. Adrian had quietly established a charitable foundation that funded pediatric education and family assistance programs across the city. True to his word, my name never appeared beside his. He insisted every scholarship remain anonymous because, as he once told me, the greatest kindness never asks to be recognized. Noah continued visiting the mansion every Saturday morning carrying new paper birds, although the windowsill had long since run out of space. Adrian solved that problem by hanging them from nearly invisible strings across the sunroom ceiling. Hundreds of colorful birds now drifted gently whenever the breeze passed through the open windows, filling the room with quiet reminders that hope often arrives folded inside the smallest gestures. One afternoon, almost a year after my first day there, Noah stood in the garden watching real birds circle above the oak trees. He slipped his small hand into Adrian's and asked the question only a child would think to ask. Are you still sick? Adrian looked toward the sky before smiling warmly. Not in the way I used to be. Noah seemed satisfied with that answer. He squeezed Adrian's hand once before running across the lawn toward the flower beds, laughing so freely that even the gardeners paused to smile. Adrian watched him disappear between rows of blooming roses. Emily, he said quietly, I spent years believing I needed people to protect my world. Then your son. showed me that the world worth protecting is simply the one where kindness still has a place to live. I looked around the estate that had once felt colder than winter itself. The halls were brighter now. The windows remained open. Laughter echoed where silence had ruled for years. The paper birds still danced beneath the sunlight, and Daniel's faded photograph rested proudly among them instead of hidden inside a drawer. Sometimes people believe extraordinary lives are changed by extraordinary moments. They are wrong. Sometimes all it takes is a little boy carrying folded paper into the room of a lonely man who had forgotten how to hope. Because in the end, power may build great houses, but only compassion can truly make one feel like home.